You are with us here on Sky News. Hello, good to have your company. I'm Ashley Gillen. We have been reporting on the breaking news that Erin Patterson has been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The 12-person jury found beyond reasonable doubt that Erin Patterson murdered Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson with a beef Wellington laced with death cap mushrooms at her home in 2023. The jury also found she had attempted to murder the only other survivor of the lunch, Ian Wilkinson. The trial in regional Victoria lasted 11 weeks and went through 7 days of jury deliberations before that verdict of guilty was reached today. Erin Patterson will now await a sentencing hearing from Justice Christopher Beale. Let's take you back live to our reporter now, Georgie Dickerson, outside the court in Morwell. Georgie, for our viewers just tuning in, take us through that moment when the verdict was delivered. What sort of reaction did we see from Erin Patterson? What was the reaction inside the courtroom?
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Ash. The verdict was handed down at around 2:20 this afternoon to a packed courtroom. There were a few rows of seats for family members and the rest was taken up by the media. But Justice Christopher Beale asked the jurors to come in, and during this time I was watching Erin Patterson, who was sat in between 2 court officers. It was at this time she watched all 12 jurors make their way inside the courtroom. None of the jurors, from what I could tell, actually made eye contact with Erin. Some of them fluttered an eyelid in her direction, but they really didn't make any direct eye contact with her. And that is when the jury foreperson was actually remained seated as Justice Christopher Beale asked the jurors if they had been able to reach a unanimous verdict, and they had. And that is when each individual charge was read out. The attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, that was found guilty for Erin Patterson. The murder of Gail Patterson, guilty. The murder of Don Patterson, guilty. And the murder of Heather Wilkinson, guilty. And it was during this time I was watching Erin Patterson, and her facial expression did not change. She stared straight to the front of the courtroom. She didn't really look upset. She didn't sigh. No real reaction when each 4 counts of guilt were read out. The jury then was thanked by Justice Christopher Beale. He made some comments to the jurors to thank them. He said that he wouldn't bother them with another long spiel, as he mentioned he had been speaking for a long time throughout the trial, but he did thank the jurors for their service, and notably he said that they are spared from doing any more jury service for the next 15 years, but he thanked them for their service, and that is when they left the room. But still, during this time, Erin didn't make any movements. She didn't have any real facial expression changes, still staring straight ahead. Notably, a friend, Alison, that was sitting in the front row, did seem quite upset. She was being consoled by the lady next to her, and after there was discussions around another hearing date to speak on a suppression order that will be heard tomorrow in the Melbourne Supreme Court at 2:15. But as for a sentencing date, that still hasn't been determined. That will be determined at a later date, so we may not find out for weeks or even months just how long Erin Patterson could be spending behind bars. But after those formalities were done, Justice Christopher Beale asked all of the public and all of the media to leave the courtroom so that the defence could have a moment with their client, Erin Patterson. And so we have just seen the Defence Counsel leave the building. We are still waiting for the prosecution to head out at the moment, but there has been limited words spoken from any of the people that have left so far. We will obviously be asking the defence for a statement on this, but they had not much to say as they did leave court. But of course, this has been almost 2 years. The fateful lunch was on 29th of July back in 2023, and it was in November 2023, that Erin Patterson was eventually charged with murder, and this investigation was launched back in August of that year. Now, this trial has captivated not just Australia but right around the world, as people are wondering how a beef Wellington could kill 3 people and almost kill a 4th. We heard copious amounts of evidence during this trial, and we did hear from the only surviving lunch guest, Ian Wilkinson, and during this trial they were documenting the moments that he was actually in a coma, but they were documenting what they were doing in an attempt to save his life after his 3 relatives and notably his wife had passed away. They documented they thought that he might also die as well. So there has been some graphic evidence that has been heard during this trial. Ian Wilkinson was present for a lot of the trial, listening, staring at Erin Patterson as she sat there in the dock for the entirety of this trial. But this trial was only slated to run for 5 to 6 weeks, Ash. We are now in the 11th week. Jurors took 6.5 days to come back with this unanimous verdict. So this small town of Morwell, that normally this courtroom is not a Supreme Court, this is for local court matters. It has been home to one of the largest trials that we'll notably see in Australian history. And when we were even just speaking to the local cafe owners, the accommodation, everything's booked out. They have been run off their feet over the past 10 weeks with this influx of media and influx of attention in this small regional town here in Victoria. We even trying to book accommodation, it has been booked out, Ash, because there are so many people that have been here waiting for the moment that we would find out that this verdict had been reached. We all had to stay in around a 10-minute radius of this courthouse because that's the only notice that we were going to be given when a verdict had eventually been handed down. But at 1:40 today, when everyone was on lunch, it was a mad scramble to actually make our way back here into the courtroom to be able to get a seat to find out and to see this verdict happen, Ash.
Georgie Dickinson, thank you. We will come back to you shortly, but right now I would like to bring in live Michael Kazilny, one of Australia's leading criminal defence lawyers. Michael, appreciate your reaction and insights with us this afternoon. Thank you. We saw so many of Erin Patterson's lies were uncovered during the trial. She had pleaded not guilty, of course, to the murders of Don Patterson, Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson, and the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, who all ate that meal that she cooked in 2023 that contained death cap mushrooms. Today, though, Michael, we know Erin Patterson is a murderer, and she'll be likely spending the rest of her life behind bars as we now await sentencing.
Well, that's exactly right, Ashley. A big relief to a lot of people, including all the families of the victims. 29th of July 2023 was that fatal lunch. She was discharged by detectives in November 2023, but a lot of stress for everybody, including all family members and of course jury members. We've got to congratulate those 12 jury members. You know, a lot of people think, how can 12 people just picked out of society determine whether somebody's guilty or not guilty? And certainly a 10-week trial, and the last week, of course, they couldn't go home to their friends and family. And it's quite interesting that jury members are informed that they can't be their own detectives. They can't speak to anybody about the case, not even afterwards, and they can't do any Google searches. So it's really a matter of trusting your intuition, looking at all the evidence. And I dare say that the substantial amount of jury members were going towards a guilty plea. There would have been maybe a minority who weren't, and that's why they were deliberating for so long.
Michael, we know that Erin Patterson's lawyers had acknowledged that, yes, she had lied about a number of key events surrounding this lunch, but over the weeks as this trial continued, the incriminating evidence just kept piling up, didn't it?
Absolutely. The prosecutor for the Crown, Nanette Rogers, did a fabulous job, and it just kept on piling up. And even though this whole case was based on circumstantial evidence, there was no direct evidence of her intentionally killing any of those lunch guests. Certainly it was an avalanche of circumstantial evidence, and certainly now she's had a taste of Dame Phyllis Frost Women's Prison, and that's well, I was going to say, unfortunately, the place she'll be going back to for a substantial period of time.
Michael, do stay with us. I just want to point out to our viewers what we're seeing here. These are helicopter shots of that courthouse in Morwell in regional Victoria that has been the centre of this trial. We saw a huge media contingent outside. There has been so much interest in what has been such a bizarre case and trial and story that's been followed and spurned already many podcasts, many column inches, many books on the go over this case, this murder. 3 people murdered by Erin Patterson found guilty today. We did see a small contingent in court supporting Erin Patterson throughout this trial. One of her friends spoke briefly with the media as she left the courthouse after that guilty verdict last hour.
Hello. How are you feeling?
I'm saddened, and it is what it is. Thank you.
Did you have a chance to talk to Erin? No. Did you think that Erin was capable of something like this? She's a triple murderer.
Were you expecting your friend to be found not guilty?
I didn't have any expectations. It's the justice system, and it has to be what it is.
What did Erin say to you in the moments before she was taken away?
What did you say to Erin when that verdict came down?
Ali, she said to you, see you soon. Were you hoping to see her?
I will.
Was Erin confident that she would walk? Those tarps went up at her house.
Was she positive that she would walk free?
Ali, when you say you will see her again, do you believe she will appeal this verdict?
I'm her friend, and I'll see her. I'll visit with her.
Was Erin confident that she would walk today? Did you think she was going to get out?
I don't know.
How do you think she was feeling in that moment?
I don't know.
Do you believe her that this was an accident?
That's not a question I can answer for you.
What do you think she would want to say to the families, to her extended family that have lost their lives?
If I could just get to my car, guys, I'm doing really good now. Thank you.
Come on, guys, enough now.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we can see there's so many lives shattered, so many people heartbroken around this story. Erin Patterson being found guilty today, 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted murder. And we know that one of the survivors of that lunch, Ian, he did give evidence as well, which, Michael, you're still with us, I believe. That is obviously very powerful to have a survivor who was present at that lunch be able to bear witness and share his insights and recollections of the day to the jury.
Absolutely, Ashley, and he gave very emotional and powerful evidence. And of course, the most important evidence in these sort of murder trials dies when the victims die. So with that triple murder, a lot of evidence died, but it's thankful that he made it through, and now it's time to move on. I think Morwell's certainly been put on the map. All the hotels were booked out, and it's quite amazing, isn't it, how crime can turn into a frenzy. People are intrigued with this story, not only in Australia but overseas, and I think the reason behind that, Ashley, is that we're dealing with a 50-year-old mother with no prior convictions, and she doesn't look like a murderer, and she just maintained that she didn't do it. So some people started believing the story, and I think from a public's point of view, people, after her giving evidence, thought she might get off and that she didn't do it. But at the end of the day, it was proven beyond reasonable doubt that there was a murderous intent.
Yes, unanimous verdict today from that 12-person jury. Michael, thank you. We did see the defence barrister for Erin Patterson, Colin Mandy, leave the court a short time ago. Have a look.
Anything you'd like to say, Mr.
Mandy? Colin, is there anything you'd like to say about the verdict? How's she feeling?
Are you expecting to appeal, Mr. Mandy?
Are you appealing this verdict? Colin, how do you feel? Erin sat very
Is this a disappointing result for you?
Let's bring you some more analysis and reaction now. Joining us is Associate Professor Brianna Chesser, a forensic psychologist and criminal lawyer with RMIT. Brianna, thanks so much for sharing your time and expertise with us. Thank you so much. As you look back over the last few weeks of this trial, what really stands out to you in terms of key turning points, key evidence that was clearly taken on board by the jury today?
Look, I think the thing that stands out the most in my mind was the cross-examination of Miss Patterson herself. I think that, she was on the stand for 3 or so days and made a number of admissions while on the stand, and I think that would have been first and foremost in the mind of the jury this afternoon when that verdict was announced.
Because as we know, her lawyers acknowledged that she had lied throughout her dealings with police and with the local hospital after that awful lunch. In terms of her lawyers saying, well, just because you're a liar, it doesn't mean that she's a murderer, it certainly didn't help in terms of the incriminating evidence that just kept piling up.
Yeah, look, I think all of us have gotten confused and in a fuffle sometimes in our lives, and we maybe don't tell the truth when we should have. But I think in Miss Patterson's case, there are a number of events that were quite deliberately concealed, were withheld, that there were some what we would call instances of consciousness of guilt there from Miss Patterson that really haven't gone in her favour, I think, and that's probably why we've got the verdicts that we have here, guilty on the 3 counts of murder.
And when you look back at those instances of lying, we know that she lied about the dehydrator, disposing of the dehydrator after the lunch. She lied about her own health as well, and significant lies about the state of her health, saying that she had cancer when she did not, lying about the reason that she invited these family members over for lunch in the first place.
Yes, and look, I think probably that would have been one of the things that was in the mind of the jury in making their decision. And I think the defence in this instance maybe wasn't able to account for those lies in a way that was meaningful enough, in any other way that was inconsistent with her guilt.
Mm. And what happens from here, Brianna? We know that this isn't over yet. We're expecting the sentencing, of course, and a plea hearing as well in the coming weeks or months.
Well, look, we still got the option of appeal, which is something that will be looked at first. I would say the defence is probably now having a meeting and really thinking about the impact of the verdict, and if there are any grounds for appeal, it of course could be on grounds of law, whether the judge erred at some point, or issues with fact. We're then going to have to think about whether or not there's going to be a sentencing hearing, and that may well take some weeks. So although we've got a verdict today, we're still not through the end of this legal process.
Brianna, appreciate you making the time. Thank you so much for that. Well, as we've been reporting, Erin Patterson has today been found guilty of murdering 3 people with toxic mushrooms following a marathon 10-week trial. Today's verdict does bring some closure to the saga that all began at that fateful lunch that Erin Patterson hosted for her relatives 2 years ago in July 2023. Sky News has taken a look back at the case that really has captivated the nation.
Saturday, July 29, 2023, Erin Patterson hosted her former in-laws at a lunch in South Gippsland, southeast of Melbourne. 70-year-old Don and Gail Patterson attended, along with Gail's sister, 66-year-old Heather Wilkinson, and brother-in-law Ian Wilkinson. All 4 guests fall ill within 24 hours after eating a beef Wellington at the Leongatha home. Her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, declined his invitation.
On August 4, less than a week after the lunch, Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson died. Don Patterson also died the next day.
I'm devastated. I loved them.
The then 68-year-old Ian Wilkinson, a local pastor at Coorumburra Baptist Church, is released from ICU and transferred into a rehabilitation ward on September 11, 7 weeks after becoming sick.
He is the sole survivor of a lethal lunch.
The way is sometimes hard, but God is good.
It's not easy for him to be on his own.
I can't believe that this has happened, and I'm so sorry.
August 4, 2023, Erin Patterson is arrested and charged.
Will she be fighting these charges, Mr. Doo?
It's early days.
Ms Patterson has pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of murder.
She also faces 1 count of attempted murder.
Erin, is there anything you'd like to say?
Excuse me.
The trial began on April 29, 1 year and 9 months after the fateful lunch. The prosecution alleges Erin Patterson intentionally included death cap mushrooms in the meal. It points to Miss Patterson's search history, where she visited mushroom foraging sites, a food dehydrator purchased before the lunch which was then discarded, and inconsistencies in her claims she picked up mushrooms at a Melbourne Asian grocer. It also claims Miss Patterson faked being sick, used a different colour plate for herself and remotely erased data on a mobile phone after police seized it. The prosecution alleged growing anger and resentment towards the Pattersons. Erin Patterson admitted in her evidence to the jury she lied to police officers when she told them she had never foraged for mushrooms.
Prosecutors allege Miss Patterson faked cancer to lure her lunch victims. The defence admits the cancer claim was a lie.
Miss Patterson's defence says the deaths were accidental. It claims she used a mix of store-bought and foraged mushrooms without knowing how toxic they are. Miss Patterson claims she was also sick after the meal and she loved her in-laws. The defence claims the dehydrator was thrown away because Miss Patterson was scared of being blamed, not because she wanted to get rid of the evidence.
3 final questions. 3 firm denials. I suggest that you deliberately sourced death cap mushrooms in 2023. I suggest that you deliberately included them in the beef Wellington you served Donald Patterson, Gail Patterson, Ian Wilkinson and Heather Wilkinson, and you did so intending to kill them. Agree or disagree? Miss Patterson, disagree, disagree, disagree.
After 40 days of the trial, 12 jurors, 7 men and 5 women, decide Erin Patterson's fate. Jack Nyhoff, Sky News.
Let's take you back now to our reporter Georgie Dixon, who's live outside the court in Morwell. Georgie, we just heard there in that piece various lies that Erin Patterson had told, but it was fascinating during this trial, wasn't it, to see the role that technology played as well in terms of tracking, looking at searches on phones, phone resets, Erin Patterson deciding to give what they called phone B to police when they asked her to hand over her phone in the initial stages of this investigation. Technology and experts around that did play quite a big role in this trial.
They certainly did, and I guess no matter, everything's still out there on the internet. It really proves that, doesn't it? That all of this time, despite trying to clear the phone, doing multiple factory resets, that you can even still see that a factory reset was done. There was also key parts of the evidence as well in terms of the iNaturalist website. That was something that was visited often. There was key points around her use of the iNaturalist website, as well as messages to Facebook friends when she was part of a true crime Facebook group. So these are just some of the items that they did speak to in this trial, and some of the lies that we have spoken about and that were touched on there in that report was the dumping of the dehydrator that was dumped, and there was CCTV of Erin Patterson actually dumping that dehydrator, and in the dehydrator were traces of death cap mushrooms. Now, there were a list of issues that Justice Bill did tell jurors to ensure that they went through, and part of them are some of those lies that were told. Part of them was what Justice Bill wanted the jurors to go through was things that whether the accused had actually foraged for the mushrooms, why her children weren't at the lunch, why she cooked individual beef Wellingtons. And I think that was an interesting point that they touched on quite heavily during this trial, was that a standard beef Wellington that we've all seen is a long log-like part of a piece of beef, essentially, but this was individual beef Wellingtons that were cooked for each guest. So questions were asked as to why for this special meal were they only individual pieces of beef Wellington rather than what the recipe had actually called for. There was also questions over why more than 1.5 kilograms of mushrooms had been purchased for this meal when the meal only called for around 700 grams of mushrooms, and Erin Patterson said that she had eaten the rest of the mushrooms rather than using them for this meal. They were just some of the things, whether the lunch guests had different coloured plates. That was a very contentious issue that was spoken on heavily, as Ian Wilkinson had said that there were 4 coloured plates for the guests, and Erin had a different coloured plate, and there was still contention around whether the plates were different coloured, whether she owned those coloured plates. So there were so many little tiny bits of this piece of the puzzle that had to be put together and had to be discussed from jurors to determine if this was a calculated murder or a fateful accident. And ultimately they have decided that it was murder. And so these were just some of the things that Justice Christopher Beale wanted to ensure that jurors went through when they were ultimately deciding whether Erin Patterson was guilty or not guilty. But of course, this is almost 2 years since that lunch. And I want to take our viewers back through a bit of a timeline as to how this all actually unfolded. And the lunch was held on the 29th of July 2023, and it was held in Erin Patterson's home in Leongatha. And it was the next day when the guests started to become unwell. And it was at this time that Don and Gail complained of feeling unwell, and they travelled via ambulance to the hospital. It was later that day that Heather and Ian Wilkinson said that they started to become unwell, and that's when Simon Patterson actually drove them to hospital himself. On the 31st of July was when Erin presented to Leongatha Hospital, and it was spoken about that she allegedly dismissed herself early without a full examination from that hospital. On the 3rd of August was when police eventually launched their investigation, and on the 4th of August is when we started to see some of those family members die. And it wasn't until the 2nd of November that Erin Patterson was ultimately charged with murder. Now it brings us to this date, and this 11th week of the trial that was only originally slated for 5 to 6 weeks. During the trial, we also heard from Erin Patterson herself, and that was quite a turning moment, I think, for many people sitting in the courtroom when they were eventually going to hear the accused and now confirmed murderer Erin Patterson speak for the first time and relay her version of events as to why she had brought her lunch guests there for this special meal, and her turn of events and her version of events rather after that meal. And it was extremely interesting to hear, and the prosecution questioned her time and time again about these lies, and she would continually say, "No, I didn't lie, no, no, no." So Ash, now till today, when we have finally received that verdict of 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, we have seen the Defence Counsel leave. We are still waiting to see the prosecution leave, but we've seen key members of police leave, and we've seen one of Erin Patterson's supporters also leave. She was being consoled in the courtroom when the verdict was eventually handed down, but Ash will bring you any more updates as they come to hand today.
Georgia Dixon live there in Morwell in Victoria. Thank you. And thank you for watching our special coverage of Erin Patterson's trial, confirming that breaking news that she has been found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder after serving her lunch guests with a deadly mushroom concoction that killed 3 of those people.